got Intel's best CPUs in for testing today. It's the Alder Lake generation from 2021. But even though it's a little older, they're pretty damn good. And today we're revisiting the CPUs. These CPUs skated by completely unscathed from the 13th and 14th generation woes that have been going on lately. They didn't seem to catch the instability problems, and they can also share a socket with up to a 14900K, which makes them pretty interesting because upgrading in socket might be viable. So we're revisiting these, and recently the 12900K was as low as $120 from Best Buy as they seemingly tried to purge inventory. But even still, day to day, it tends to be a little bit under $300 from Amazon, Newegg, kind of big retailers, even when new. So oddly, these CPUs have remained somewhat relevant even as people purchase them in 2024. But we're mostly revisiting this to see what the market looks like, if it's worth upgrading, if you happen to have an Alder Lake or 12th gen CPU family. So we're revisiting the 12900K, the 12700K with the KF variant, it just means there's no IGP, the 12600K, 12400, and 12100F in this video. And as a quick reminder for the history of these things, we don't normally do this, but I thought we'd go back in time. We do have one of those time machines. It's the server rack right there. Wendell normally travels in it. Go back in time and grab some clips. Here's what we thought of the launch back then. Wrapping up then, this is an excellent first volley from Intel with Alder Lake. It is on the expensive side. Price has crept up. Performance, fortunately, has also crept up, but so too has power. You get some new and exciting technologies with Alder Lake, DDR5 being one of them. Ultimately, it's about how this competes, and this is surprisingly decent value when compared to the 5900X and the 5950X, especially in production workloads. There are places where AMD still holds an advantage, but they have gotten slimmer. Now that was for the 12900K, but we were also pretty positive on the low end of the stack. Here's what we thought of the 12100F. So at $130, it's actually a pretty exciting CPU for us to review because for gaming, it did very well. And even with a high-end GPU, it's doing pretty well. So we were impressed with the gaming performance. We were really excited about what Intel was doing at the time. It was fiercely competitive, even though the price was creeping up, and AMD wasn't as domineering as it is right now. So let's get into the revisit. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Antec C8 cases. We reviewed the Antec C8 ARGB a few months ago and found it to be an overall competitive performer using unique 160mm fans. There's also a version without included fans, and it's competitively priced while still offering attention to detail key elements like the airflow partition for better directing air intake. It also has high-quality kill management grommets and limited obstructions for bottom air intake. The ARGB variant includes all these features, but also two 160mm reverse blade fans and one 140mm fan. Learn more at the link in the description below. Now, it's easy to forget how positive media generally was on some of Intel CPUs in the past generations when looking at just the most recent stuff. The 200 series, complete dud. The 14 and 13 series were basically refreshes, and they also had their own problems. But Alder Lake brought forward a new platform. It had new I/O. It moved to the option of DDR5, but could still do DDR4 if you bought the right motherboard for it. And it started moving towards things like PCIe Gen 5. So it was a total overhaul of the I/O capabilities. And even before that, the 8000 series, like the 8700K, was a CPU that we were pretty positive on because it was competitive. That was when AMD and Intel were going back and forth a lot. Now, at the time of the launch for the 12 series that we're looking at, AMD had sort of forsaken its budget market. It left it behind as it stuck towards a $200+ category, and that had a huge opening for the 12100F. Now, they later brought the 5600 around. It became a viable option, but Intel had a pretty good opening there, and overall, AMD's pricing was not as fierce as it was for the 3000 and the 2000 series before it. AMD was becoming more confident in its position, and it was starting to charge for that. So we saw that reflected in the price. Now, the 12100F ended up getting our best budget CPU of the year award at least 2 times because of its budget positioning. The 12900K was very competitive in production tasks in addition to gaming. And the major issue that these CPUs had when they had an issue tended to be with the heterogeneous architecture, where going with P-cores and E-cores in some games, it was causing scheduling conflicts. That still happens sometimes, but a lot of it's been worked over. Now, for the review today, to make space on the charts so they're somewhat legible, we're removing the 7900 non-X, the 7700 non-X, the X variants are pretty close by in performance anyway, and the 7950X Eco Mode results from the gaming benchmarks. You can find all of these numbers in our 9800X2D and 7600X2D CPU reviews if you'd like them. They are directly comparable terrible. We just took them out to make some space. Now, we'll have some commentary on drop-in upgrades and when they do and don't make sense in the conclusion of this, along with some discussion about how the used market is a little bit of a minefield right now. But let's just start with some of the benchmarks, and we'll start with two experimental tables we've made that are trying to do a quick summary recap of the positioning of the 12th gen today. We have a table we're experimenting with for this. This table will list the closest equivalent component for each application tested. Sometimes the ranges don't line up well, so we choose the closest within reason, but we deferred to older parts where necessary. We defined modern as anything from Ryzen 5000 or newer, and anything from Intel 13 and newer, even though 5000 can be pretty old. It opened up more comparisons though. Broadly speaking, we noticed that the 12900K is similar to a newer i5 in several games. This included Stellaris, F1, Starfield, Final Fantasy XIV, and the Ultra 5 and Rainbow Six, but with worse lows for that one. The Ultra 7-265K was also close in Final Fantasy and Baldur's Gate 3. AMD's CPUs are more varied and include the 7600, 7600X, 5800X, and some X3D parts. Generally, those are higher performers though. The 12700K was broadly similar to an Ultra 5 245K from Intel or a 5600X to 5800X from AMD, with some X3D presence. Most X3D parts, again, are higher than this. The 12600K was regularly near the 5800X and 13600K CPUs. The 12400 regularly neighbored the 5600X and sometimes the 245K or 9600X. The 12100F had few modern neighbors, mostly aligning with the older 3700X or 3600 for gaming performance. Here's the same concept, but applied to production workloads. Intel Alder Lake does better here for modern equivalents. The 12900K is regularly similar to a 13700K or 7900 class CPU. It isn't distant from the 265K in decompression, although dips in Premiere closer to a 245K. The 12700K is similar to the 13600K in many of its tests, so after 3 years it's dropped to subsequent series i5 performance levels in some of these. The 245K is regularly right alongside the 12700K. From AMD, the 9700X and 7700X are regularly its modern equivalent. The 12600K is mostly similar to the 9600X or the 7600X in many tests, with no nearby modern Intel equivalents. They're all higher than this. We might have to test a 13400 or something to see this level from Intel. The 12400 is regularly near the 5600X. In some tests, it's down at 3600 or 2600 levels. The 12100F has no modern neighbors, and in some instances, no suitable comparisons close by. The R5-2600 is regularly the closest comparison for the 12100F. We'll start with Stellaris for the games. The space game was used for testing simulation time rather than frame rate. This is still a great benchmark because the results don't care about resolution and graphics really. It's a highly CPU-bound game with real-world implications for time. First up, our new entry, the 9800X3D with liquid nitrogen and at 6.2 GHz. Although you could have a friend or family member pour LN2 while you game, it's maybe not likely, but we wanted to put it here just to show how insane the CPU is when pushed to the limits. It also gives us an upper bound for the benchmark. Snap back to reality, and here we have Alder Lake. The 12th gen CPUs land at 36.7 seconds for the 12900K, 37.7 for the 12700KF, and 41.2 seconds for the 12600K. We also have the 12400 at 43.1 seconds, and top to bottom, this creates a range of 6.4 seconds, or a reduction in simulation time from the 12400 to the 12900K of 15%, meaning 15% less time to simulate. If you had bought the 12900K for $630 in 2021, then it's given you about 3 years of performance and has aged into an i5 modern one in this test, which really isn't that bad. The 14600K is adjacent at 36.6 seconds. An in-socket upgrade to a 14900K would get you about a 9.5% reduction in simulation time, and is probably not worth it for most people. The 9800X3D without liquid nitrogen would yield a 30% reduction in simulation time. The 12700K is slightly better than a 5700X3D, with the 12600K around 5800X and 5600X levels. The 12400 is significantly better than the 12100F and just behind the 5600X. Dragon's Dogma 2 is up now in this one. The chart leader is the 9800X3D at 129 FPS average, which is an incredible lead over the 7800X3D's 111. The 12900K falls down to a cluster of Intel parts that cap out around 100 FPS. The 265K is roughly equivalent to the 12900K in averages and lows. The 245K isn't far behind. The 14900K boosts the ceiling to 110 FPS average alongside the 13900K, 14700K, and 13700K that find a 10% higher ceiling. The 5700X3D has functionally identical performance to the 12900K. Anything on this list is a side grade for it other than a 9800X3D. We feel the same about the 12700K. It wouldn't be worth upgrading in this test alone. The 12600K and 12400 show more age. Both are still great for frame rate and completely playable, but at least a gap to the top is established. Moving to a 98X3D would boost the performance by 46% from a 12600K. An in-socket upgrade might be about 22% by moving to a 13700K. The 12100F is at 71 FPS average, which is also remarkably good for such a modern game. But the lows are hurting a little more and sometimes get spiky. Overall, we're impressed how it's held on. Upgrading to a 13700K in socket would be a huge upgrade from the 12100F. It would be economical overall, and it might be worth considering. Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail is a 2024 entry for us. The Alder Lake series does okay here from an absolute standpoint, but it's far down the charts in a relative sense. The 12900K and 12700K are between the Ultra 7 265K, which did horribly in this benchmark, and the 13600K. The Ultra 200 series is known regressive in this game, with Intel also showing the same behavior. The sad thing is that you'd be going backwards if you didn't pay attention to benchmarks and bought a 265K. It wouldn't be a crazy thing to do either. It's 3 so-called generations newer, yet it's worse, at least in this performance, than a 12700K and a 12900K. The 12600K wouldn't even see a huge uplift to it either. The 13700K and 14700K offer large improvements, around 15 to 18% from Alder Lake, though you'd need a good price to be worth the purchase. The 14900K boosts to 310 FPS average, an uplift of 26% over the 12900K. AMD's 9800X3D sets the ceiling at 373 FPS average, with all the other X3D parts right alongside it. Starfield is up next. The 12900K hits 124 FPS average in our test here, which aligns it with the 13600K and 14600K CPUs, slightly bested by the 5800X3D, which goes to show how good the 5800X3D was at launch, especially given the price gap when both the 12900K and 5800X3D were still regularly available brand new. The 9800X3D shows room for a 36% improvement from the 12900K. The 285K with ultra-fast, expensive memory and Gear 2 improves by 23% on the 12900K, but the like-for-like comparison has it at 15% ahead. The 12700K is similar to a 245K. You'd be downgrading overall by moving to it, aside from efficiency. The 5700X3D is also nearby. Upgrading the 12700K to a 14900K will get you about 13% more performance, and probably isn't worth it overall. The 12600K stands to gain more notably if upgraded in socket to a 13700K, where it gained 26%. The 12400 could be worth considering an in-socket jump to a 14600K or 13700K as well, if cheap enough. The 12100F is somehow still chugging along, sandwiched between AMD's 3000 series parts and outperforming the R5-3600 and R7-2700. Baldur's Gate 3 used to have the X3D series all in the 120s, but the 9800X3D broke that in a massive way and hit 160 FPS average in our particular test case. We validated this in our 98X3D review and explained why it's happening there if you're curious. The X3D dominates the entire top quarter of this chart though, followed by the memory-boosted 285K, and those two things make sense together because we're running into those memory and cache constraints. The prior generation 14900K, 13900K, and 13700K are all within error of each other, so don't be confused by their ordering. Their performance is identical and within run-to-run variance, which is due to encountering a memory limitation. We can see this from the 285K stock results versus the DDR5 8600 results. The 12900K ran at 96 FPS average, or equal to the 265K. The 265K would be an expensive downgrade when looking at the total picture. The 12900K is still doing well enough here that it probably doesn't make sense to replace, except maybe with a 9800X3D. The 12700K is about tied with the 245K. Like the 12900K, there aren't many worthy upgrades here. 13700K, 39 or 14900K would give about a 15% uplift in our testing. The 12600K and 12400 are at about 13600K levels of performance. An in-socket upgrade to a 13700K in this chart would yield about 28% improvement from these CPUs. The 12100F had trouble running this test. We might be able to force it to work, but natively the low performance was bad enough for frame times that we consider it disqualifying in our test. F124 is up next. The game scales from 163 FPS average up to 464 in our testing, so there's a large range here. The 12900K starts Alder Lake off down in the range of i5 CPUs, including the 13600K and 14600K. Inspecting the data, we found the 12900K had a more variable range for average FPS than some other CPUs, which appears to be due to its core arrangement, Windows 2H24, and just F1. The range was 310.5 FPS to 316 FPS average run-to-run. Upon inspection, it's due to the frame time pacing, where we sometimes get a higher throughput with worse pacing, and sometimes the opposite. This makes averaging still okay, but less reliable run to run just because of how the CPU behaves, but it's all representative of real performance. Overall, it ends up around 13600K levels. We saw this last time as well with an older Windows version. The 14900K has a 23% advantage on the 12900K. The 9800X2D runs 49% ahead of the 12900K. The 12700KF is between the 5800X and 5600X, with the 245K just ahead. Intel's 12600K lands at 270 FPS average, meaning a 13700K upgrade would boost the average by about 34%. The 12100F still does great here, all things considered, and is just ahead of the 3700X, but of course it has huge amounts of room to improve if you wanted to upgrade. On to production benchmarks. For these tests, we're looking at applications like Blender, Chromium, Code Compile, and more. Users of the i7 and i9 CPUs are more likely to care about the performance here. It's one of Intel's stronger points as well from the past generations. Blender 3D rendering is up first for production. The 12900K did well here. It's at 11.7 minutes required to complete a render of the GN intro animation single frame, which has it about tied with the 12-core, 24-thread i9-12900 non-X CPU. The 13700K does well with its higher frequency and equal core count to the 12900K. The 14900K has large gains here from moving to a 32-thread configuration, reducing the time required by 27% to 8.5 minutes. It's about the same as what we see from the newer 265K, with the 285K doing well in one of its few strong tests and reducing time to 7.1 minutes. That has it at about 9950X levels of performance. If you are upgrading for gaming, the 9800X2D is the only option that might universally make sense against the 12.9, but for production, unfortunately, the options wouldn't necessarily move the needle on gaming performance in a meaningful way, despite offering large gains in workstation applications. You'd have to choose between the two. The 12700KF has the same core count as the 13600K, so the two perform about the same. An upgrade to the 14900K in socket would be a huge 39% reduction in render time required. The 12600K is at about levels of the 9600X R5 CPU. The 7800X3D outperforms it, but is better in gaming than production as compared to the non-3D parts like the 7700X. The 9800X3D would at least improve on the 12600K somewhat, while giving a big boost to gaming. As for the 12400 and 12100F, they're near the bottom. The 12100F struggles with core count, so the 2600 is a little faster. The 12400 is roughly tied with the 3600. In Chromium Code Compile, the 12900K required 119 minutes to complete the compile. This has it closer to the R9-7900 non-X than anything else. The 13700K improves with its higher frequency and equal core count, with the 14900K giving a compile time reduction of 26% less time. The 285K is also a big step up, though not significantly different from the 14900K. Intel's 12600K might see enough benefit from an in-socket upgrade to a 14900K or 14700K that would be worth considering, especially for the gaming uplift, but only if you're trying to save on cost by reusing a board and DDR5 RAM. The 12100F required 382 minutes, still about an hour more time than the i7-12700 and about tied with the i5-12600. 7-zip compression testing makes the 12900K feel a little older, outperforming the 14600K by just 4.3% and similar to the 9800X3D. In the very least, upgrading to a 9800X3D for gaming would net equal performance in this type of task. The 14900K offers a 38% increase in MIPS over the 12900K, maybe making it worth considering. A new build with a 9950X yields about a 46% uplift in this benchmark. As for the 12700K, that's down near the 7700X and 9700X, with the 14700K 48% higher in MIPS. If you have a 12600K and wanted to stay on Alder Lake, moving to the 12900K improves performance by 48% here, which is pretty massive. The 12400 is more similar to a 5600X or 3600, so anything would be an upgrade. The 12100F is at the bottom, falling behind the 2600 in a predictable way with its thread deficiency in this test. 7-zip decompression shows a lot of scaling with cores, as indicated by the 9950X and 7950X. The 12900K still does okay here and bests the 9800X3D on a technicality. The 265K offers an uplift that wouldn't be worth buying into, with the 285K pushing 30% higher in MIPS to 193,000. The 7900X and 13900K offer more meaningful uplifts though, with the 13900K and 14900K benefiting from higher thread count and opening opportunities for upgrades. The 12700KF is at 245K levels of performance and about tied with the 5800X. The 12600K would see multiples of uplift, with some of the newer options at the top of this chart, again including the 14900K and 13900K. The 12100F isn't comparable to anything here, with the 12400 similar to an i5-12600. Adobe testing is next with the Puget Suite. Back with the Alder Lake launch, we stuck with Intel for our premier editing systems since it was the best opportunity at that time. Today, the part still does pretty well in Premiere. Actually, we still use its direct descendants in our main editing machines, including 13700Ks and various i9s. The 12900K scored 9948 points in aggregate, which has it between the 9800X2D and 7900X. The 14900K wouldn't boost it much, only 11% here. The 285K scores a rare victory in this one, but again, wouldn't be a huge move if you're already on a 12900K. It might make more sense for a new build. The 12700KF could be kept relevant a little longer with a bump to 14700K and still be a top scorer on the chart with modern memory. The same goes for the 12600K and 12400. The 12100F at least outdoes the 2600, but that's kind of it. Adobe Photoshop is last. This one is a bloodbath compared to many years ago, with Adobe updates and AMD architecture changes benefiting AMD. The 12900K is in the lower half of this chart and surrounded by i5 CPUs, with the 12600K near AMD's 5800X. The 12100F at least does comparatively better here than some of the others and outranks the R5 3600. Overall, almost anything is an upgrade over Alder Lake in this test. All right, so wrapping all this up, the 12th gen is actually still pretty good. And this is where we always like to address when it makes sense to upgrade. So people commonly ask, should I buy or wait, as a question, and we break it down like this. If you're on a 12th gen series CPU, you need to just evaluate, are you happy with your computer right now? If you are not actively annoyed by something with its performance, such as the frame rate or the render time or whatever it may be, if you're not feeling like you're missing out on something or it's bothering you, then you just keep using it. There's no need to just buy every cycle or even every 3 cycles. If it's still good, it's still good. So you can keep running it. If, however, the performance is bad or you just want to build a computer because it's fun, then there's a couple options here. One of them is in-socket upgrades, which we'll talk about. There's a lot of caveats there. And another one is just obviously building a new system. So first, for in-socket, the 13 and 14 series would be potential drop-in upgrades. The lower down the stack 12th gen CPU you have, such as a 12400, a 12600K, the more meaningful it would be to do this. For this to work, you'd need to make sure that your motherboard with a 12th gen CPU has the newer CPUs on its compatibility list. You can find this on the manufacturer's websites. You'd also need to update BIOS. Further, if upgrading from something like a 12100F to a 13900K today, you'd want to make sure that your board has a good enough VRM to handle the additional heat and power. Likewise, it's ideally an unlocked board for more feature support. Now, we tested with DDR5 today for our comparisons for a like-for-like scenario. You could have built the 12 series with DDR4, and if you did that, then that does potentially pose some limitations for scaling of the CPU performance if you were to do an in-socket upgrade like to a 14900K. It's possible that your DDR4 will kind of chew some of that total performance uplift potential away from the in-socket upgrade. So if you're on DDR4 and you do an upgrade and you are also upgrading the memory to DDR5, that means you have to upgrade the motherboard. Now you're swapping 3 parts that are all very expensive. At that point, it might be worth, for a gaming system, just considering 9800X2D, a 7800X2D if they're different in price, or if they're the same price as the 98, or something like that. So just something to think about where the memory situation may limit the usefulness of an in-socket upgrade. Finally, the minefield situation with 13th and 14th gen. So this hasn't really happened before. Traditionally, CPUs are bulletproof. They are pretty reliable to buy from eBay or something, especially Intel's in the past, and just assume that it's going to be completely fine, like basically as good as it was when it came out of the box, because that's just how CPUs had been built. Unfortunately, with the 13th and 14th gen, with all the stability issues that they've had, it is possible that some users just dumped these onto the market on eBay or whatever, especially before the information was out there, to just get rid of it and upgrade and move on. So if you end up being the new owner of one of those, it's going to suck. And that makes it difficult to buy used, at least without some base level of anxiety to make sure that the CPU you're buying is not one of the problematic ones. So you can ask them all you want, but you're ultimately taking the seller at their word for why they're getting rid of it. So that's definitely something you'll have to think about. Now, even buying the 14 or the 13 series new right now, the prices have dropped a lot lately, and something like a 13700K really might not be a bad option if you're on the lower down 12 series parts. So that's the revisit. Overall, objectively speaking, these CPUs for the most part, with one kind of exception of the 12100F sometimes, for the most part, they're still great gaming parts. Of course, they're not at the top of the charts anymore, but that's okay. And as long as you're happy with performance, then keep using it because there's always going to be something better. And it makes more sense normally financially to hold on to that platform and put the money towards the biggest possible upgrade if you're still happy with the platform you're on. Again, with the one exception to that being, if you just want to build a computer because it's fun, that's totally valid. And there's a lot of options right now. So things to look at. If you've been out of the market for a little while, go check out our 9800X3D review. That'll get you up to speed on all the AMD competition really fast. And you could also check out the 200 series reviews, especially the 285K review, if you're not familiar with that CPU family. Because there are a lot of problems with a potential move from Alder Lake to the 200 series where it really wouldn't make sense. And we wouldn't want you to fall into that trap of just basically doing an accidental side grade because you're looking at the 285K like it's 3 generations better. It should be a huge uplift, and you find out it's not except for maybe efficiency. So it's a weird market right now. It's changed a lot since the 12th gen, but there are a lot of really good CPUs out there. It's just that most of them happen to come from AMD right now for gaming, and production gets a little more nuanced. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more as always, and check back for the next videos. We'll have plenty more CPU coverage, but we also have some cases coming up, including our roundup for end of year. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net to buy our brand new dice sets. We have them in Inductor and Snowflake the Cat variants. The Inductor dice sets use actual e-waste inductors embedded in sharp edge resin dice, and all the dice sets come with these boxes that have 3 components to them. Pulls apart to a roll tray, and it's just a nice carrying case. It is a great way to support the work we do directly, and you get something pretty cool in return. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.